So this one is going to be a little more demure in only the fact that the theme of this particular one is death. And I don't mean that to sound overly macabre. But so to fill you all in on what's been going on, it's been a tumultuous set of weeks for me because recently, just this morning, I had to let go of my very dear and beloved little dog, Kubo. Um, Still a little hard to say that right now. It's still very fresh with me, but I figured I would like to get this down in vlogging format and have something to look back at. It's still very surreal. It seems really odd without him here. Now, some time before this, I had also lost my eldest cat, named Zero. So, you know, the whole thing with death and dealing with it and all that sort of thing has been very prominent and very fresh with me right now. The thing is that, you know, you probably wonder, well, you know, why is he bringing this up? I mean, number one, I'm going to bring up a lot of different things, but it does circle back around to something that, you know, I'm going to kind of open up about here. So, you know, all throughout my life, aspects, darker imagery and that sort of thing have been prevalent and present in some of the works of art I do. Even some of the ones that were a little bit more maybe cutesy or something along that line still had an element of sadness to them. I know that even whenever I did my illustrations for my first attempt at a children's book, which was Daisy's Rainy Day Doldrums, which is out of print. I don't have any more of those. I will probably end up redoing the book at some point in time, putting it back out there again. But sorry, I'm digressing. In that one, even right about the time that book was done and it was back from the press, I had lost my oldest beagle, Violet, at the time. And so this was some years back. And I think the hardest thing about all of that was, you know, and this is, first let me explain something here. When it comes to the concept of, you know, dealing with death in general, I tend to have a very, I wouldn't say accepting point of view on it. I really wouldn't say that because, okay, man, I feel like I have to talk almost in a circle about this. So here's where we go. Yes, I am very much still grieving for my little dog. It's very strange. He was my buddy, and I'd only had him for a year and 4 months. But in that time, sometimes you'll come across, whether it be people or animals or something, but for me it was this little guy, you know, when he came into my life, you know, he came with a host of medical problems too. He had skin issues, which, you know, we were able to overcome that. There was, and then out of the blue, he started having seizures. And I know that there's all sorts of, you know, versions that people say there are grand mals or whatever, and these smaller ones. He'd have a variety of different intensities of them, but they were still seizures. And if you start to cluster, and to anybody that knows, you know, any animals or people that have seizures, it's not great. That's something that people, for the most part, can deal with and live through. With animals, it's a little bit more of a different issue, and it can become far worse. And there's still not a lot known about what really causes them, as far as I know, and as far as my vet was able to explain to me. Now, all of this said, I knew that when I had taken him on and, you know, and brought him into my life, I guess in the back of my head I always knew, okay, I've probably got a certain amount of time with him. Now, if somebody had told me that I would only have like a year and a couple of months with him, I would have scoffed at that, because I tend to not want to believe that sort of thing. I even though I can tend to be something of a downer, I try to stay in the positive, and I try to look at the, well, the glass is half full. I still have this. And don't get me wrong, during that time I traveled with him, I had him around, I did all kinds of things with him. But there's always those things that'll happen, and that's, and you know, in talking with people over years, and you know, writing and doing other stuff, and you know, I love to hear stories that people will talk about. That's something that always comes to play, you know, and whether it be, you know, somebody didn't spend enough time with a parent, or they just didn't get around to seeing their sibling, or maybe they just should have taken one extra walk with their dog, which is something that's going through my head right now. You know, we end up processing this in different ways. And I think the thing was, now understand that Kubo was, I believe, 9 years old is what my vet thought. So I'd had him toward, you know, the beginning of his geriatric years. And he, you know, as you can see, he's like this little puffball, kind of like weird menagerie of a corgi and like a Pomeranian. And he had this weird little battle cry, and I'm hoping that somewhere I've got it recorded. I believe I do. I took tons of hours of footage and photographs and everything. I just, like, you know, just because I could. But he had this crazy little kind of like little noise that he would make, and I loved it so much that someday, and that's a whole other thing, I will use that in a character somewhere in voiceover. I make that promise that he will live on through that. And so, getting back to this whole thing, so, you know, yeah, nobody deals that I know of can deal with death that fabulously. I mean, unless you're maybe a hard-nosed sort of mafia assassin or something like that, and you know, we have to condition ourselves to deal with the passing of a loved one, or just even anything like that. I mean, but I tend to be something of a tender heart. If I see that somebody's suffering or somebody's passed on, you know, that I didn't even really know that much, I tend to have a little bit of sorrow creep across my mind, you know, and certainly it pains me a bit, because I don't like to see anybody in pain, even if they're kind of my worst enemy or something. I still don't. So, but the reason that I'm talking about all this is because even way before this, it had kind of affected me. Now, I have to go back a little bit on this, because I was in Boy Scouts, and I made Eagle Scout, and it's actually hanging up there on the wall. I don't know if I've shown that in another video or not, but when I went through that, prior to making Eagle Scout, I was with Troop 405, which was based out of Whiteman Air Force Base. And the reason I'm telling you this is because when I was 16, I think I had just turned 16, and I don't know that I've even ever told my parents this happened, but I was en route to Philmont, which is a scout reservation. That's a big adventure-based sort of thing. And we had stopped because since it was a military base, the two guys that were with us, one was a Lieutenant Colonel Meikle, and then there was another fellow, I cannot remember his name. We had gone to Philmont in this big suburban vehicle. Long story short, the transmission went out and it crapped out on us, and we ended up having to stay at this car dealership and then at this hotel. Well, there was a small pool that was outside, and of course, being in the middle of summer in the northern part of New Mexico, a little blazing hot. So we were staying there. Everyone was like, well, get in the pool, get in the pool, get in the pool, this sort of thing, cool off, all this other stuff. I've always been very reluctant to do that because I have all the swimming capacity of a tire. So I just, you know, and I might float, but that means I've probably drowned, and that is my body floating down current. So as it turns out, I end up getting, you know, into the pool, but I was so nervous and just not in my right head. I'm very self-conscious, very like, yeah, I don't want to jump in the pool. And that, you know, and I was also that kid that if somebody sneezed in my general direction, was 5 miles away, I probably would get sick. I was a very sickly kid growing up, and you know, slightly on the larger side at that point too. I think though right around that time I managed to slim down because of more activity in Scouts. But the point was that I still couldn't swim. It didn't matter what my physical capacity was, I still couldn't swim. And somebody was talking to me or something, and I looked over to the pool and I'm like, okay, I guess I'm going to jump in. Well, I jumped in. Sure as hell I did that. But I didn't jump in on the kiddie side. I jumped in on the straight, go all the way down to the bottom of the Loch Ness side. I don't remember much except for this. And take whatever I'm going to say as however you want to interpret it. But it's one of the, well, I'll just tell you the story. So I fall in the water. I guess because of the way that I went in, I just expected to kind of jump down onto that. The bottom of the pool was this real gritty kind of, you know, again, I've rarely been in pools, so I imagine a lot of them are like this, but it had kind of like a sandstony, sort of grouty kind of bottom. And I remember just making a beeline, feet first down. The bottom of my feet scraped it. I went back and I hit my head. Now, whether that was the reason that I began to black out, or whether it was me swallowing exactly, 57% of that pool into my lungs, I don't know. I do know that I completely lost consciousness. I remember this noiseless explosion in the back of my head, and I remember looking up, and I swore I could hear something like people screaming or shouting, and I thought I saw like shapes in front of me. Then there was a bunch of bright circles in my eyes, and I was gone. I was out. And this is so surreal. Again, something I don't really talk about. I woke up. I use the term woke up because that's the only way I can really define it. In a field. It was what looked like a massive green field. Stormy clouds, windy weather, the grass was blowing like this. I remember looking straight up and seeing the grass kind of billowing over my face. And as I sit up, looking around, there's trees everywhere. But in front of me, probably what I would surmise was about 100 so feet, maybe further, a massive old moss-covered stone bridge that looked like it could have been maybe 13th, 14th century sort of architecture, going over this small stream. When I say a stream, maybe about 10 feet wide with water slowly trickling by. Would have looked not out of place in, a painting by Bob Ross. And I remember seeing more trees beyond that. I got up. I was in like clothing I would wear every day. I wasn't in my swim trunks. I was wearing a pair of jeans, sneakers, and I had a t-shirt on. And I remember looking around, and the weird part was I could hear the wind, I could feel the wind, but there was something playing. There was a notation of some kind. I don't want to say it was music because it didn't seem like any music I'd ever heard. I could, there's like when you hear music, you can do a 4 count. I'm familiar with things like, little offbeat stuff like Indian music has a 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 4, whatever, that sort of thing. There's certain things you learn when you have some knowledge of music, and even if you don't, there's beats that we understand and we, associate with certain kinds of music. I'd never heard anything like this before. Now, granted, I was only 16. Whatever you want to say, I was a kid, so maybe there was some sort of music out there I just never heard before, but I cannot identify that. And over the years, I still hear that same thing, but I've never heard anything like it. I don't have the musical propensity to be able to recreate what I heard. Nonetheless, I started walking toward the bridge, and I distinctly heard the sound of what I think were dogs in front of me, somewhere on the other side of the bridge. And then I heard a voice that I had not heard in a very long time. In fact, I'm fairly certain that I imagined it because again, I know I was dreaming, so I mean, anything's possible in a dream. We know that. It's this, a systemic amount of input and imagery and things that'll come together and coalesce in this menagerie that occurs in the mind's eye theater. But I remember hearing my grandfather's voice, who was my mom's dad's voice. Now, I'd only known him in passing when I was very young. He passed away from cancer, and so, but I would stand forever and stare into his eyes because my grandfather had these very unique eyes. I don't believe there's a photo that exists that anywhere of that, but he had very dark eyes that had like these orange flecks that came out from the center. According to my mom, it wasn't like anybody else's eyes in the family, and so nobody else seems to have inherited that. My mom certainly didn't, nor none of my siblings did. So, but I remember what I assumed was his voice, and he was speaking to me in Spanish, and he was telling me that if I wanted to, I could come across the bridge. And I remember running my hands across the bridge and feeling the moss on my hands, and this weird sense of sadness, yet at the same time a hopeful happiness, but he told me that I couldn't cross the bridge so long as I had that sadness in me. And I remember him asking, or this voice asking me, well, why are you sad? And I said, because I'm going to miss my mom and my dad, my brother, my sister. I'm going to miss my dogs. I'm going to miss, you know, my fish. And yeah, it's kind of dorky. I had a little beta at that time I named Admiral Akbar. And so, you know, I was, all of this was welling through my head. And the entire time I'm thinking to myself, this isn't really real. You know, I kept thinking this isn't real, and I think I know that that was what my mindset was, and probably the reason why to this day I'm still not sure what happened. And he said, and then he said something back along the line, again in Spanish, that maybe I was right, but you know, if that was the case, then I can't cross the bridge. And I turned and I said, well, and I apologized for some reason. I said, I'm sorry. I don't want to go there yet. And I don't even know what there was in my head. I don't know what I was saying. But I turned and I walked back. And I kept telling myself I didn't want to forget what it looked like. Now, there's a small set of imagery in my head as to what I think I recall. And over the years, I'm hoping that I didn't embellish it. It's always been the simplistic aspect of tall blades of green grass, a very stormy, overcast day, windy. And I guess in a romantic sense, what I would imagine a stormy day would look like on the you know, in Ireland or something, a very green land or something like that. It could, I've seen, you know, images of Iceland, you know, so it could have been something like that. But over the years, I've tried very much not to do that, and I've failed every single time I've attempted to draw it out. It doesn't really come to me. But again, I turned and I couldn't hear the voice anymore, but I looked back to where I'd been, and it was just very bright. I could still see it, but it looked like I was looking into the sun, but the sun was like 1,000 times closer to me, and if not brighter. And all of a sudden, I had this massive pain, and I fell in the grass, and I looked up, and it felt like all of my lungs were on fire, like my nose wanted to explode. I felt like I was choking, and I could hear somebody yelling my name. And then, even though there wasn't anyone else there with me, it felt like there was drool or something on my face, and I coughed really hard. And I remember both of my ears popping, and I woke up, and I'm face to face with my, I think he was senior patrol leader at the time, but my good friend Jason McNally, and he was in my scout troop, and he was giving me mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. It took a few seconds to realize what had happened. Everyone's standing around, everyone's looking at me, and I was coughing and coughing. There's mucus. There's like, it was not the most glamorous moment of my life. And I'm throwing all this water out, and I'm coughing, and I'm hurt. It hurt. Everything just hurt. I couldn't draw enough breath. Oxygen was like the sweetest thing in the world I'd tasted at that point. And so I sit straight up, and I'm looking at him. I'm looking at everyone. There's a crowd around me. I remember there was 2 people standing in a doorway over to the side, and some people looking from a second floor balcony, like kind of a glass door thing you could step out and look at, and they were looking down at me. And pretty sure I urinated myself. Not at that point, but like at some point in juncture in there. You know, like I'm pretty sure, you know, as much as I can tell, I drowned that day. I don't know what I saw. I would love to say that was heaven. I don't particularly believe in that. In a certain context, I do not. I don't know that when death happens that we necessarily go somewhere else. I don't know. I mean, this is just me. This is just my own understanding and my own opinion. It doesn't say anything, and I'm not saying that anyone's wrong. I would never say that. You know, I was born and raised Roman Catholic. I had very strong ties to the church and a lot of other beliefs for a long time, but over the years, you know, I've probably lost my religion to a large degree. But I do not believe that religion or organized concepts and theologies or anything that are necessary if we are destined to go somewhere. That said, that became a theme over the years in things I would look at. And the concept of mortality, the concept of where we go, how, and what we end up being like, stayed very much in the forefront of my mind. Enough so that it may, I sometimes, I know this is going to sound extremely stupid as well too. I don't really subscribe to the concept of fearing what death would be, and I only say that because even my scoutmaster said, I really thought we lost you. You weren't breathing. We couldn't resuscitate you. And you know, the logical aspect of me wants to look at it and go, well, it was deprivation of any oxygen to the brain, it was the blow to the head, it was any number of other things that I would want to procure a scientific basis for and adhere to that. Such can't really be explained in what I was really seeing afterward, though, like, or during. I don't know. It was a set amount of imagery that wasn't anything from my childhood necessarily or anything along that line. I can't begin to put that together. It doesn't have a cohesive concept in my brain. So anyway, the reason why I'm telling you guys all this is because of the fact that, you know, it has fascinated me over the years how that sort of thing has woven its way through a lot of the stories and ideologies and stuff that I've written, especially in my poetry, where, you know, it would be that sort of macabre sort of outlook, but not for the shock value, not because of anything. To me, it is more of it's a little evocative, but it's also a transformative concept in my head of what really lies beyond. You know, it's much more than just that. You know, I mean, that's probably one of the reasons why, you know, the whole Dia de los Muertos, or, you know, the Day of the Dead thing, which has recently really come into the popular mainstream. You know, a lot of people have adopted it, and I'm fine with people doing that. Who am I to judge? But, you know, there's a concept behind it. Now, my parents, for many years, one of the things we've always believed is that you keep people's memories alive by knowing their name and having their pictures up and things like that. Now, my mother and father do not have an ofrenda per se, you know, where all of these things are set up and there's candles or anything else like that. No, but they do have walls of photographs of people in my family that go like all the way back to the 1800s, and I think my mom and dad were the last people in the family to really give that much of a care to do that. But it's been bequeathed upon me and my sister and my brother to keep that sort of thing going. So it's a very strange sort of thing to think about this, because it isn't necessarily in a negative way. Yes, it is sad when people go on. It is sad when we lose pets. But I hope in my heart that, you know, especially like just having lost my little dog Kubo today, you know, because we couldn't, there was no way. The vet was like, you know, I don't think we can control the seizures. I don't think there's, you know, there's many more things neurologically wrong with him. So the call was made to let him go. And so, you know, I went through a lot of, I guess, almost kind of survivor's guilt, where it's like, well, how can I enjoy today? How can I go on and be happy with him gone? But I went through the same thing with my cat Zero. I lost my grandparents, all of them, you know, over the years, when, you know, I've lost good friends. And one of my really good friends, Andrew Sloan, he's actually featured in my comic Pagan Zoetrope. He's one of the few, if not the only person that I really feature in there who's really as he was. And I ended up struggling with that for a while, because I didn't know whether or not to go on with him in the storyline, especially after he passed away. He passed away from a brain tumor, and which really jacked up story on that. It was wrapped around the creative area of his brain, so if they had operated and tried to remove it, he might not have ever been able to do art again. And so he opted to say, no, I'll fight the cancer best I can. I don't want to lose the ability to make art. And he, you know, pretty fearless guy, and I miss him every day. Good man. But he, you know, he's another one that, like, you know, I guess I tend to want to believe that as long as we keep people's names and memories and their stories alive, then they live on, don't they? You know, I guess we could look at modern mythologies in that way. You know, ancient mythologies no differently. I mean, why do we, make movies today about, the 300 Spartans? Why do we talk about George Washington? Why do we talk about, Kunta Kinte? Why do we talk about different people, real and or imagined, that have traversed time and lived on? And it's because those are more popular, more populist sort of stories, but there's always things that can be told within a family that keep people going on and moving forward. And I guess the biggest thing that I've come out of this is, wondering, how does that affect other people? Like, I know that we all grieve. I know that we all will end up, I mean, there's a fantastic, it's horrible to say it that way, but it's a very fairly profound lyric in Iron Maiden's album, Seventh Son of a Seventh Son. And I cannot remember the song, which is horrible from me, but and it's probably a repurposed quote from something, but it says, there's a time to live, there's a time to die. When it's time, something along, when it's time to meet your maker, and something along the line of, isn't it strange that as soon as we're born, we're dying? And that's probably one of the reasons why I've had a huge aversion to ever celebrating birthdays, because it's just like, yeah, I'm just one step closer to getting in the grave, and that is certainly a macabre way to look at it, but nonetheless one that still is true. It's probably the reason why, especially as a creative person, I have all this idea debt, and I have all these concepts that I wish to get out and work on and do, but then you think about it, and it's not unlike what, in a recent interview Stan Lee said, I just wish I had more time. And that's true, but we don't. And unless there's some huge scientific breakthrough that ends up adding to the longevity of a human living, we will never have enough time. And I say that because I'm a human being. I understand that whole concept. You want to be able to create, to work, to do these things, to live, and so few of us do that, really. I mean, and I really mean that, because when here's the crazy thing about all this. You have death as this one concept, but then there's also living. Now, how many of us really can say that we're living? And I don't mean that. I'm not getting all meta on you guys. What I'm saying is, there's a lot of times that we will make every excuse in the world not to do something. And don't get me wrong, there are blockers in this world. There are things that will overwhelm us and things that can completely cut the feet out from underneath us. I don't deny that. We cannot possibly plan out for every single thing that would stand up and become an insurmountable wall in front of us. This is true. But something that I can say I learned very much, and the reason why I grew so close to my little dog Kubo, was anytime that I took him somewhere or I went along with him, he was the consummate social butterfly. There wasn't a person he didn't meet that he didn't love, and there wasn't a pack of dogs he couldn't blend into. He would run out there, he would be the bravest little fluff bucket on the planet, and he taught me so much about just living in that moment and jumping headfirst into things. I can honestly say that too. I'm going to transition into something where I don't normally, I worked security for a long time, so I'm not intimidated by people that much. And this isn't a machismo thing. I normally can talk to anybody and I have no issue. There are people though that will sometimes catch me off guard, and I'm like, oh, hey, I don't know that I can go talk to this person for whatever the reason might be. And this past weekend that I worked at NakaCon, which was actually a very great show, and I can't thank, Beth Hall and the other people that put it on for doing the amazing work they do there. But here's the point. For those of you that don't know who he is a very prolific voice actor. His name is Steve Bloom. And as you can see here in the photo, I met him. I finally met this guy. I had talked to him before on Twitter. He's always been a hero of mine of, these sort of things. And the whole thing went down basically where, when I was sitting there, I was thinking about my little dog. And so, I always try to put myself out there because for the most part, I'm a fairly introverted person. It's taken a lot to do even this. And on a side note, the sad note is that I started doing this vlog because eventually Kubo was supposed to be my co-host. And in a way, I will still carry that on with me. But through the bravery and through his very forward nature, and that I will not let go. But so the whole point was that I saw him walk by my booth where I was set up, and I guess I was messing around my phone because it was kind of dead. It was on Sunday, and I knew that I couldn't leave. It was just me and my booth. There was nothing I could do about it. And so he walks by, and I look up and I see him, and I'm like, oh, it's Steve Bloom. Oh my God, it's Steve Bloom. And I didn't even think twice. There was a chair right by, because I was on a corner, and there was a chair. I just leapt over. I did some crazy like freaking X Factor jump, landed, and ran after him. Steve, 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 Steve. I got up and I'm like, Steve, and the closer I got, I'm like, show your chill, slow it down. I got up close. I'm like, Steve, Mr. Bloom, Mr. Bloom, how are you doing? And I was like, sir, I don't know if you remember me. I'm the guy from Twitter, and I'm like, what kind of asshole comment is that? I felt like such a jerk, but immediately as soon as that happened, like my whole context shut down. I was like, and it, I automatically switched to looking like or sounding like I was going through puberty. I kid you not. It probably didn't sound this bad, but I was like, oh my God, man, like, oh, Mr. Bloom, you're the guy that like, oh, when I mean, you do Wolverine, and you know your voice work on Box Trolls, and I'm such a fan, and so I completely lost it, and I finally managed to kind of get my whole crap together again, and I was like, I mean, thank you so much for what you do. And then I even thanked him too for, you know, kind of, you know, saying some good things about Keanu Reeves. There's a long story behind that, but you know, I managed to somehow verbally vomit this alphabet soup out onto him. Somehow it cohesively came together, and he was able to make something out of it. But he's very kind, and he was very nice, and he was going to try and swing by my booth. I understand he was not able to. You know, he was trying to make it around the vendor room and meet some other people. But I remember thinking to myself, like, you know, I laughed at myself because when I got back, I was on cloud nine, and I was telling everybody that would listen, I just met Steve Bloom. I just met Steve Bloom. Mr. Steve Bloom. I just met him. And I was going through all this sort of thing. And the entire time in the back of my head, I was thinking, yeah, that was my little, I went out just like Kubo, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to just, I don't give a shit. I'm going to go out there, and I'm going to be strong, and I'm going to be fluffy, and I'm going to be all these things, and I did, and I was. And, damn it, I missed my dog. And you know, the thing that really gets me, start getting emotional. The thing that really gets me is that, you know, even on a day like this, I am really heartbroken. I am really down in the dumps. But I did have some really good friends reach out, and people talk to me about this, and people that care, that, you know, came forward and extolled their sorrows and all that. And for that, I'm very grateful. You know, it helps having a family too that is a great support system. And, you know, I still look at it that, you know, I don't know. I know there was supposed to be more books on children's stuff that I was going to do, and I was going to have, you know, my dog's in it, my cat's in it, and that sort of thing. And, you know, when you go through these losses, you just kind of step back for a second. You have to kind of recalculate. And does a true professional let that stop him? No, but maybe I'm not as true of a professional as I should be. So maybe there's a modicum of other lessons that I have yet to learn in that. So nonetheless, I hope you all enjoy this crazy bit of 30 minutes plus storytelling that I just did, and kind of a crazy little update, you know, what my days have been like and that sort of thing. I am doing fine. I'm doing as well as I can without hearing the stompy feet of my crazy little Corgi Pomeranian mix pooch. And it still doesn't seem real. It seems like I need to go pick him up at the vet or something. And it probably will hit me in the next few days, and I will probably be curled up underneath one of these desks in here and not want to be bothered. But we all grieve in our own ways. And, you know, anyway, so thank you again for watching and for you know, taking the time to make it through. If you made it all the way through, thank you so much. I do appreciate that. If you have not yet subscribed, please hit the subscribe button down below. If you liked what I was talking about, give it a thumbs up. If you are now sobbing and or crying or thinking about your own animals, give me a thumbs down. Either way, it's like what one of my teachers used to say, you know, if you're creating art, bad reaction is just as good as a good reaction, but the worst reaction in the world is no reaction. So, you know, there's no real show notes for this one. I guess you could go Wikipedia the word death if you really want to find out more, but come on, we'll all get to know that at some point in time, right? Geez, that's a really bad way to end this thing. Thanks again for watching, guys, and I'll catch you in the next vlog.